Alrighty, here we go. Hi everyone. We are going to get started in a moment. Thank you for checking in. We're going to get started with our conversation, just waiting on Imade to join us. So give us a moment while we get settled, all right? Hello everybody, I see a couple of well-known hands. Hi. Let's see. Hi Jared. Hi everyone. Hey Remy. What's up everybody? Just waiting for our little connection to get Imade started before we start our conversation. Thank you all for joining. There's so many folks coming in, popping into the room, waving in. Familiar faces, familiar names. Feel free to drop in the comments where you at, where you from. I would love to know everyone who's here. There we go. Let's make sure my sound is on. There we go. All right. Imade's having a little bit of a challenge connecting. Let's see what happens here. Hi, Annie, CPhD from New York City. Hello. Right, we know you're in LA. And Buffalo, New York in the house? Okay. Canada, wow. What part of Canada? Nice. Love to see my Canadian fam in the house. Okay, let's see. Imade, I'm trying to get you connected. Let's see. Request, go live with. I'm going to add. It's been acting a little funny. You know, it's a Mercury retrograde, so technology's going to give us a little run for our money. Hi.
Hey, Yolo. Good to see you.
Good
Sorry
to see you
about that.
too. No,
Yeah.
not your fault at all. Like just technology. You know how it is.
Yeah, the hotel Wi-Fi trying to hold me down, but
Listen.
breaking the shackles tonight.
At least you can blame the hotel Wi-Fi. It's just my house Wi-Fi. It's just trifling, so it ain't nobody I complain. I'm so excited to. One, it's funny because we talk, but I don't get a chance to see you. So I'm like seeing you, like it's
so
we talk so much, and it's like, oh wait, I get to see your face now. Like as opposed to just having conversations on the phone or over text.
Absolutely.
I am just honored and really excited to have this conversation with you today. For all of you who are joining us, I will say my name is Yolo, and you want to say your name?
Yeah, I'm Imade.
And we are today holding a conversation called The Black People Who Were Left Behind, exploring the realities of psychiatric jails and our folks. And so very serious subject matter, very critical conversation for the work that Beam and Depressed While Black will also talk about in a minute about building a Black vision for mental health. And so we're so excited that you all will join us and that you are present with us. A couple of things I want to do before we get into the gist and the heart of our conversation today is I'd like to just do a couple of grounding pieces to make sure people who will come into the room, new to Beam, know what's going in, what's going down. So the first piece I just really like to make sure we lift up is that whenever we hold a space that is calling us into a liberatory framework, calling us into revolution, calling us into transformation, I always want to make sure I name that this is in the legacy, the lineage of so many Black folks who have been doing this for generations, right? So we're talking about from Harriet Tubman, we're talking about from like, Frederick B. Douglass, we're talking about the Black Panther Party, we're talking about all the folks who were calling into the space, Joseph Beam, the radical Black activists who have really laid the framework for us to have a dialogue like we're having right now, right? And so I just want to hold those folks in dear and name them. Yeah, and like I like to name them, and I also want to invite people, if you like, to just take a moment to maybe in the comments, to name some folks whose work, some ancestors, some people whose work you're really holding as we hold this conversation about the intersection of the criminal legal system, psychiatric prisons, and Black folks. So I want to invite people to write into the chat. I know one person I'm bringing into the space is Fred Hampton, who's been in my spirit and my head a lot lately, just because of his charisma and also what his vision was. I see that it's just really pivotal to how I've helped cultivate my vision. So I'm bringing him into the space. Imade, do you want to bring somebody into space, somebody that inspires you that you want to name?
Yeah, I think there is a young teenager by the name of Ben Riley. He took over a Texas prison turned mental hospital and told the staff his demands and wanted, culturally competent care. And I just look up to people like that, freedom fighters like that, Ben Riley. So yeah.
Ashe, naming Ben Riley, bringing Ben and Fred into the space today. I see a couple of folks name some people. Somebody said Mamie Phillips, Clark Phillips. Absolutely, definitely want to name Mamie Clark and her amazing work with psychology and Black folks, which really paved the way for us to be here today. Give people another moment. People who are joining the room, we're just inviting folks to name people of power, ancestors, inspiration, folks we want to bring into the room as we hold our conversation. We always acknowledge that this conversation is a lineage. We are part of a long line of resistance that is still going on to this moment. And so we just like to make sure we call some folks into the space. And so I'll give a second for maybe like one or two more, and then we'll move on to our program. I see a lot of names I know and recognize. Hello, hey y'all, hey y'all. And we got Portland, Oregon in the house, Inglewood in the house, Norwich, Connecticut is in the house. Come on, Norwich, representing. We know. All right. So no one shared anyone else. So we have Dr. Joy DeGray. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Ashe, bringing in that person's energy and space. All right. So with that being said, we just want to hold those folks dear to our heart, and we're going to move into our conversation. So a little bit of context. I am the Executive Director of BEAM, the Black Emotional Mental Health Collective. And BEAM is a national training, movement building, and grant making institution dedicated to the healing, wellness, and liberation of Black and marginalized communities. And I am excited to be in conversation with Imade, who is the founder, curator, cultivator of really the movement, the advocacy space that is Depressed While Black, right? And I'm really excited to have a conversation with Imade because we've talked before, just so you know, so this isn't the first time we're meeting, okay? But I really felt like when I first came across your work, it was just one of the spaces that I found was so powerful because you were really lifting up the experiences of Black people navigating treatment-resistant depression, navigating BPD, navigating like a therapy, finding virtual therapists, just navigating depression. You were holding the space for an authentic, honest voice that wasn't kind of like, oh, mental health is all fun and yay, it's self-care, like, which is what we see all the time, right? It's like, this is
right.
Not the reality of what it means to like, struggle with our mental health. That it is sometimes very difficult, that it is hard, that there are difficult things we have to own and like be present with that don't have quick solutions, right? And so through your advocacy platform, writing for Essence, for Forbes, for the Black Youth Project, I mean, I could sing praises all day, like many places, right? But really advocating and bringing to the forefront, being a part of this larger movement of Black folks saying the way we think about mental health, the way we address and support people with mental health has to change, right? And so I'm just really grateful to have an opportunity to have that conversation with you and be in dialogue with you about that. So I'll stop there, and then I just want to kind of open up some space. I know I sent you a little outline for our conversation. We went back, talked about, but you know how this is going to go. We're going to be like, whatever the spirit feels like, we want to let it go. So, I just want to open up the conversation and just say, why do you feel like this conversation is critical when we talk about, and why the term psychiatric jails? Like, why is that critical for our communities and for healing and wellness?
Yeah, I was hospitalized twice. The first time was definitely, I felt like a punitive mental hospital. The second time I had to work my way up to a psych ward that had, better privileges. So I call it psychiatric jails because a lot of times they use the same prison punitive framework and even the same furniture as prisons. So some of the same tactics. So in a mental hospital, they may not call it solitary confinement, but they'll call it an isolation room. There's so many of the same tactics of physically restraining people, chemically restraining them through harsh medication that they don't need, that makes it almost unable for them to speak. The same type of oppression and the same type of prison industrial complex, it's a part of the mental hospital system. And so, yeah, we're calling it jails because this is a place of great oppression where people are not able to speak up and advocate for themselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for lifting that up because I feel like in the current kind of conversation around abolition of prisons, right? It often speaks to a specific kind of like prison state. Like it doesn't necessarily speak to the psych wards or to the mental health hospitals, which as you point out, operate as prisons. I can think about, with your work, I can also think about people like Patrice Cullors, who talks about in her book, When They Call You a Terrorist, about the experiences of her brother who was living with schizophrenia and how those institutions were not designed to really help someone kind of cultivate healing. Could you talk a little bit more about like how you saw those institutions like impact yourself and as well other Black folks that were in space with you?
Yeah, I think that the way that there's like a conveyor belt to these mental hospitals, and a lot of time it's through the police. So a lot of the defund the police is definitely connected to psychiatric jails and the need to liberate our people from them. So my first kind of encounter when it comes to a punitive nature of the mental health system is when I was a grad student at USC. And I told two counselors that, I'm suicidal, I'm struggling. Just a couple of days ago, I was speeding on a Los Angeles highway, wanted to die. And the two counselors told me flat out, okay, so you need to drop out of school and we're going to give you a police escort to the hospital. And that's the only way you can go. And I told them, like, can I just drive myself there? Can I take myself there? Like, no, the only way you go there is through a police escort. So there is like a punitive police carceral state that escalates you to the hospital. So it's not just the psychiatric jail that's traumatic. It is the way they take you there, basically in the back of a cop car. And so as a grad student, I had to fight my way to not get into the back of a cop car. And of course, they didn't know, and they didn't even ask me, what is my relationship to the police? If they asked me that question, they would know. I lived in South Central LA at the time. Police helicopters rattled the house. They beamed their bright lights into my apartment. It was normal to see police officers chase suspects through the bushes. I was in a militarized zone. And they essentially were telling me the only way that you can go to a hospital where you're supposed to get better is through basically having this punitive military force take me there. It's messed up. And a lot of times when it comes to Black folks, we're not ourselves because we don't have a choice. What they're doing is they're saying, now in my situation with the grad school, it worked out pretty okay. I fought them off. I said, I'm not leaving my school because that would mean losing health insurance. And then they also told me I should go home, and they didn't ask if I lived in an abusive home or if I had an abusive family member. But fortunately, I was able to kind of like not do that. But for a lot of Black folks, we're forced to go into hospitals involuntarily. And what they'll do is, even if your paper says that you voluntarily went, it's basically sometimes you're going in involuntarily because they will threaten you with an involuntary admission that has lower privileges if you don't do voluntary. So it's still coercive sometimes, even if you voluntarily go. So it is trauma built in so many different entry points of that system. And we know that Black folks are more likely to be placed in punitive mental hospitals than white folks, who are often given the opportunity to see a therapist, to get prescribed medication that helps them. While a lot of times we go from suicidal, we go from mental health crisis to a psychiatric jail.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So many points and power, like so many pieces you name in there, and this brilliantly laid it out for us to kind of really see the connection. I want to I want to tease out more of those connections, and I think one of the pieces that you really lift up is about the connection between um, the criminal legal system, the police, and psychiatric and mental health care. Right, the fact that is deemed like acceptable that police escort is a way to get someone into care, right? And not even acknowledging the legacy of violence and murder of the police, but particularly to us as Black folks, right? How traumatizing and triggering and activating that is in of itself. And so it makes me think about I've been reading a really great book by Mab Segrist, and she's talking about the history of a psychiatric museum, a psychiatric institution in the state of Georgia, the Milledgeville psychiatric organization. And in it, she really details how we got to this specific moment where the police are now the kind of intersection between the psychiatric and mental health care, right? Talking about how, like in the past, there was the asylums, right, which we know were terrible and abusive and violent and towards black folks, but also disabled folk, people living with mental illness, right? And then with the deinstitutionalization, what happened because of pharmaceuticals, because of the reorganization of the federal government, right, is that people were then they were shut down and people were just kind of out on their own. And then we see the criminal legal system begin to slowly begin to say that like you're living with the mental illness, now you're going to be incarcerated in the same system, right? And so I just think about that particular intersection and why it's so important that we need to defund the police around this. And could you talk to me? Like, I'm curious about I'm curious about like what a possibility could have been for a scenario when like, hey, I think I need to check myself in, but like, what's the possibility of somebody escorting me? Support? What could that look like if we didn't have the police doing that? What do you think that would look like?
Yeah, I mean, there's systems like that, Cahoots in Oregon that do mental health crisis intervention, and they include mental health professionals. I think for me, it would have been great if there were peer support workers who were there with me, guiding me throughout the whole process, who already were in a hospital, may have already been suicidal in their past, and kind of walk me through that process from a place where there's no power differential. Because the issue of, getting entered into the system is that there's this great power differential that happens that inhibits us from advocating for ourselves. So I think for me, if I had a Black peer support worker who broke it down, what the next steps are, included my family and my friends into this process, because this is how they disappear Black people, is by throwing you into a mental hospital and then not telling anybody in your support network what happened. So if there was a way for a Black peer support to break down these steps, to talk to my mom who has no idea what's going on with me, talk to my best friend, and then that would be really great. And I think that if I went into a mental health facility that actually let me outside, that would have helped me just tremendously. The first mental hospital that I went to it's a lockdown facility. We were never outside. I wasn't outside until 2 weeks later. So if it was a place that was not locked, that I was able to freely go in and out of the premises, I think that it would have helped me a lot, because for a lot of folks who are dealing with mental health crisis, we already feel oppressed by our mental illness. Like, we don't need more oppression from the system.
Yes, and I appreciate you bringing that piece in, because thank you for also offering us that vision and uplifting the work that's already happening, where peer support workers and folks are actually doing different models that aren't involving the criminal legal system, right? Because it's one thing to say we need to defund the police, and it's another thing to uplift strategies and tactics that show that this is possible, that you can call a crisis, and that it works, and that you can call a crisis line, get someone to come support you, and also be a Black person, be a person of color, be a person of lived experience, right? And break it down with you from a place of integrity and not from a place of domination and control. I think that's really just powerful and critical for the vision of Black mental health that we want to create for ourselves, right? I want to talk a little bit more about the piece you just lifted up, Imade, about the design of the facilities, right? The design of facilities, also like the fact that from what you described, it's like I'm coming in and I'm suffering and I'm being punished for my suffering, right? Like, what I mean? The space is not being designed to really kind of like, let me get out and breathe. Let me be able to like get support and dignity, really, right? Is what we're talking about. Could you talk a little bit more about like how you saw those spaces designed that were not helpful and useful?
Yeah, so the first mental hospital that I went to, it was in Westchester, New York. It's called Weir Cornell. and it's a very reputable hospital. The nurses at the emergency room told me, you should go there. It's a great place. And when I first walked in there, it looked like a resort. The first floor had a gift shop. Me and my best friend, we were like, oh, we're just gonna lay out on our bed. It's gonna be so great. And I went into this like kind of nice office area, and the first thing the social worker did basically was show me my blog that I wrote where I said I was suicidal. So then that made me feel like, uh-oh, like they're getting evidence to keep me in here. That was my first thought. It was I felt really kind of like, oh my gosh, these people stalked me. So then that happened, right? And then I went upstairs, and it turned from a resort to like a living nightmare very quickly. As soon as I, heard those doors lock behind me, I was in a really claustrophobic space. It was like one long hallway. And of course, tile floors, bland paintings on the walls and stuff like that. But, it was just nonstop chaos. There was constant screaming. The first night that I was there, police officers arrested a young Black man who was, yelling some of the same frustrations that I had. He was just, I hate it here. I don't like the food. I want to go home. Like things that I feel naturally. He got arrested for it. And because it was just one long hallway, it felt really like claustrophobic. Like you were on top of everybody. And because we didn't go outside, we were just all like in this one space. There was a nurse station at the end of the hallway. And right next to the nursing station was the solitary confinement room called isolation room. And in there was a middle-aged Black woman who was so chemically restrained that she was drooling on herself and slurring her words. But the thing that I love about her is that she was cussing the nurses out. I love that she still was fighting, even in the midst of being chemically restrained, being unable to, speak intelligible sentences. She was still advocating for herself. She was still fighting. She was almost permanently in that isolation room. Technically, you're not supposed to be in there the whole time. It's not your room. But for her, it basically was her room. They just put her there the whole time. I think it was like an L-shaped hallway. On the other end of the hallway, there was like an exercise bike, but it was really old. So basically, it was a co-ed floor. When I got there, I really was afraid that I was going to be sexually assaulted because there was a patient that flirted with me, and I felt uncomfortable with that. We were living right on top of each other, and there was another patient that was walking into people's rooms because, he was so chemically restrained, he didn't know what was going on. Everyone seemed to be either dissociated from reality because they were so drugged, or they were angry like me of like, I hate it here, Eventually it got to be a little bit better where I started talking to other patients and connecting with people and really seeing the talent and the beauty in these folks. But when I first got there, it was really terrifying.
Like, it's interesting, like, no matter how much we know every time, and I just want to acknowledge, like, you even were telling that story. I know that's activating and bringing up things for you, so I want to hold space for just acknowledge that. And every time, even like for many of us who've experienced various different forms of distress with the police and as well as with psychiatric institutions, that is also very activating for us too. So I want to hold that space for people who are in the room to like just please be mindful and take care of yourself as we have this important but also very activating conversation, right? There's a couple of pieces I want to also bring out of that piece. So you talked about the design of it, and it makes me think about, and I saw someone write in the comments the name of the book by Mab Segrist, Administrations of Lunacy. Thank you so much for doing that. I'm trying to multitask, but I appreciate you all who all did that. But in that book as well, they talk about how, just linking to what you talked about, there is a very deeply ableist assumption in American culture, built into American culture, that people who are living with mental conditions or who are in distress do not deserve dignity, right? Are not deserving of a space where they are treated with respect. And like that space that you just described reflects that vision, right? it reflects that, not that inherent core belief that at the intersection of ableism and racism and sexism, that people who show up differently or show up in distress differently are not worthy of that dignity. And so I'm curious to know from you, going back to our visioning piece, right? What could be a vision when we imagine what a space could be like? You're like, you know what I mean? Like, what could a space be shaped like? Like, you talked about this narrow hallway, right, in these beds, and it was not really security to protect people around around like from sexual assault, from like this, like it wasn't a place for people to get air. What is an imagining that you would like to offer us?
Yeah, so there's this Nigerian doctor he was living in post-colonial, like newly post-colonial Nigeria. His name is Dr. Thomas Lambo, and he created an outpatient facility called Arrow Village. And basically, he created an outpatient facility, but like around it were like community members, and so people who had mental health conditions would actually live with these community members. There also, these folks that were patients would have a family member come with them, and they were basically a part of the community, and the community was a part of like traditional healing would be incorporated into the programs. And it wasn't necessarily about like warehousing them in a building, but it was about rooting them more deeply in a community so that they can get the care that they need. And it was very much of like a symbiotic relationship, because the hospital will give community members like money to fix the house and do whatever upgrades they needed. And I think some of the patients did help with the house and things of that nature. And then the community members, they like the hospital. They really appreciate it. So sometimes they would give money to the hospital to get repairs, to get electricity. And I really love that because, you know, when I was in that hospital, I basically was disappeared. I was an hour from where I lived. My best friend had to figure out how to get up there to support me. I was very much like hidden away. And what I love about Arrow Village is that they were seen. There, it was wide open, and there was not any locked doors. It was bringing them closer to the community, you know, not far away from it.
Mm-hmm. I love, as you share that vision, I feel like I saw you light up, right? And I see
Yeah,
people in the
I
comments
did.
also just share like you can feel that energy shift for like a vision when for a healing space, right? In a community, in a village care, right? Like not a self-care, like a
Right,
village care, right?
right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, and that's very possible for our world, right?
It's already happened. It was happened. I think it was like the 1950s. So it's
Mm-hmm.
already happened.
Mm-hmm. And so I think that one of the things I love about this conversation, and I'm so grateful to have it with you, is that, you know, we're sharing, and hopefully the folks who are listening and watching are also understanding and remembering. And the names and the things we share, we're going to post them on our social media. So I'll post a little profile with the books. I know we both have some books we want to suggest, as well as the examples and the doctors like Arrow Village, etc. That can kind of give us collective visioning, right? But I think that this conversation is so important in this moment where I feel like, you know, there's an opening kind of happening, and we need to interject this vision into that space, right? We need to
Absolutely.
interject this vision and say, like, this is possible. This is just what ableism and racism and sexism and misogyny have taught us is the only possibility, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so moving to the next piece, you talked a little bit about like, you know, the concern about sexual assault in the facilities, right? And also being a Black person in the facilities, being like, and so I'm curious to hear from you, how did you see race and gender and all these pieces play out in those institutions, not only with yourself, but with other folks, in ways that you think that when we imagine our new vision, we need to be mindful of?
Yeah, the second hospital that I went to, it was in Rockville, Maryland. It wasn't as traumatic because I kind of already understood the game.
Mm,
Unfortunately, you got to play the game to get out of the hospital. So I already kind of knew how to present myself. But what I noticed, the second hospitalization, um, it was mostly Black people in the most punitive ward, like the ward that had the least privileges, were mostly Black. And then, you know, when you play the game and you kind of be on your best behavior and work your way up to like a less restrictive ward that has more privileges, I noticed more white people.
mm,
And not only did I notice more white people, I noticed white people who were like actually running the floor, like actually like navigating and facilitating the check-ins.
mm,
Like these white folks that were patients had power to be
mm,
part of the treatment. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see Black folks doing that when I was on another more restricted floor. I noticed white women who had postpartum depression. I noticed them have their children. They weren't talking about how the system took their children away. But there was a Black woman on that less restrictive floor, and she was hoping to get her child back. I noticed these things that were happening, how Black women were getting chemically restrained to the point where they couldn't speak, and how, young black men were getting physically restrained, and there were police getting called into the mental hospital to arrest them. These things were just clear as day to me. I noticed how the nurses, those that carried out a lot of the punitive practices, were Black. They were in these kind of low wage jobs that require them to do double shifts. So they would be there for 12 hours. And so they're not getting the care that they need to help us, because they're just trying to survive. And so when I was, for my first hospitalization, I came in from the protests. So the Eric Garner protests. So I was fired up. I was ready to go. And so when I, expressed that, this is not good, I'm getting worse, this place is not a good place, I got physically restrained myself and thrown into an isolation room. And the people who, threw me in were Black people. And so I think we definitely do need to talk about this, because it's like the doctors are white and non-Black, but the folks that are on the ground, that are going to be in your face, that are going to be talking to you every day, those nurses are Black, and they're carrying out some of the anti-Black policies that the white doctors are enacting. It's a lot. But I think that there is, even in that system, I found a lot of therapeutic help in just one-on-one talks with Black nurses. So sometimes some of these Black nurses, like collectively and like publicly, they'll not treat you well. They'll, like what you're saying, they'll be like, well, you did this, so that's why you're here. Like publicly they'll do that. But then like the next day or 2 days later, quietly they'd be like, I understood why you were upset, and I think it was good you expressed it. So I feel like we need to empower some of these Black nurses, some of these Black doctors, to advocate for us, because I think personally they know this is not right, but they're scared because they don't want to lose their jobs. So
Absolutely. Yeah, wow. So I just want to pause for a moment, like just kind of give us a moment, because like, you know, you shared a lot of different pieces, right? And I'd like to encourage us to pause, because, sometimes we can go through these conversations and think that they're pretty cerebral. And like I said before, it's not, right? It is something that activates us. Um, I really appreciate you bringing in the layers of not all the ways in which Black people, Black women, Black trans people, Black queer people, I'm sure gender nonconforming folks experience these institutions, but also the ways in which Black people can be complicit in maintaining the system that is creating so much harm, right? I know you and I are part of a plethora of different advocates in Black mental health, some of which who are not necessarily going to be excited about this conversation, right? Who might be more invested in the older models of psychiatric and mental health care, right? And so I think it's so important to acknowledge that that nuance in the context of this piece, that there are folks who are holding different spaces. One piece I also would like to curious about, with your experience, like you talked about advocating for yourself, right? And so I'm thinking about like even the process in which I'm in this institution, I'm being harmed, I'm being chemically restrained, I'm being like denied my rights, my dignity. What is the process was told to you when you were in the institution that you could do to regress, or to address that harm that had happened? Did it even share with you there was a possibility of you filing a complaint? What did that look like, or did not look like?
yeah, it was difficult, because at that time when I was hospitalized, I didn't know how to regulate my emotions. So if I saw people being hurt, I was going to get really activated and really triggered by it.
Mm-hmm.
And just from kind of a Black queer perspective, I noticed that they really punish people for being homeless. They would cause Black people to stay in these hospitals indefinitely sometimes if they don't have an actual address. And that disproportionately affects Black queer youth who are dealing with homelessness at a higher rate than a lot of other folks. And then, you know, another thing about that is that some of these psychiatric hospitals are really gendered. And so what if you're non-binary? Like where do they put you? Like it's just it's a challenge. I remember an older Black man just say out of nowhere in the hospital, you know, I'm not gay, I'm not gay. And it felt almost as if he was trying to like perform masculinity to protect himself in these spaces where you don't know what's going to happen. You can wake up and you don't know what's going to happen. And so I did notice folks really being disproportionately affected by these policies, and it's Black queer folks, it's Black non-binary folks, it's Black trans women. For me, the process of doing a complaint is basically getting a lawyer that's assigned to you from the hospital. That was my experience at the first hospital, Weir Cornell. You get assigned a lawyer, and the lawyer that I had told me, my mom, my best friend, that she's scared to just get on my psych ward. Like she's just scared to walk on my psych ward. Like she's just scared to just come up in a place where I sleep every night. She's scared to just come there. And she told me, you know, basically you don't have a chance. But you know, if you want to do this, you know, do this. And yeah. And so we appeared in front of a state Supreme Court judge. They took me by ambulance because that was the only way that I can go. They said that I couldn't wear regular clothes, so I had to wear a hospital gown in a stretcher, brought in a stretcher to the courtroom. I had, you know, no shoes on. They wouldn't let you wear shoes, so I had hospital socks and a gown, and I'm up against my assigned psychiatrist who's on the witness stand. And basically she said that if my mom takes me home, I'm gonna jump out of the car. Like just flat out lied that that you don't let Imade go home with her family because it's gonna be terrible. And unfortunately, because of that power differential, me in a hospital gown, this, you know, non-Black psychiatrist on the witness stand with, you know, work clothes, the state Supreme Court judge was like, nah, like you got to stay. And that was really a heartbreaking experience for me to go through that. And that was basically my, you know, complaint system. And so once I got back to the hospital, I advocated to be taken to a different floor so that I wouldn't have that psychiatrist. And that was the best advocacy that I could do, was to move. And I felt a lot safer after I moved, and actually started to enjoy a little bit of the hospital experience after. So there is hope, but it caught so much privilege. I had my mom with me, I had my best friend with me, and I relied on their advocacy because a lot of times when folks who have mental illness, nobody listens to us. They think we can't say anything that of any value. And so I had my mom and my best friend vouch for me, and there was a lot of privilege there.
Absolutely. And so, like as you say, it makes you wonder, or just kind of go into fear and frustration about what happens to folks who don't have those folks with them, right? What happens to folks? And I noticed in the comments as you were talking, people also were lifting up other examples that really show the ways in which the system is dehumanizing folks, right? But also the ways in which even like shackles are used. Like, you know, there's been a history of using shackles around people's necks, around people's hands, like restraining is used, right? This really deeply embedded connection to racism, to slavery, to white supremacy, like is really embedded in these systems. And so once again, you know, you share this like this example of what's happening to our folks every single day, right? Who don't have people to support them, and even people who do. And even the lawyer example, someone who was actually appointed by the actual institution that was incarcerating you, right? So like even that has a inherent bias into it, right? Like, you know, that like what is the vested interest of this person if I am actually employed and hired by this person to represent you? And of course, the first thing I want to tell you is no, you have no chance. You have no
Absolutely.
chance. You have no legitimacy. And I think that's a big piece of why we even frame this as the Black people left behind, because so often folks who are in these institutions, as you said, as you named, you're disappeared, as you said, like, right, isolated. And so what we need to be thinking about, in my opinion, and from in thinking about Beam's work, is like we have to tear the lid off of that space and say, like, absolutely not. This is absolutely not acceptable for a Black or for anybody to be hidden away in these institutions and dehumanized. And we have to fight to redefine, and reimagine the system, and the ways that you so beautifully laid out are possible for folks, right? Um, One of the things I want to lift up too and ask you more about is one of the things that Beam and Depressed While Black are collaborating on this month is that Imade and Depressed While Black actually for several months now have been raising funds where she has been going out to actual, like, she actually built relationships with two different hospitals and actually buying supplies that everything from bonnets to I think you were buying bonnets, t-shirts, and, like, and
With
socks, and, like, different things like that.
brushes.
Yes, brushes is like, because in those institutions, folks aren't allowed to have those things that can really kind of like soothe and ease and support us when we're in distress, right? And so one of the things we'll be doing for people who are watching is that Beam is going to be like supporting Amada, and we're going to be taking donations. So you can make a tax deductible donation to Beam, and there's a button I'll give everyone the link to that'll actually like give that money to Amada, and you can get your tax deductible donation so that Amada can buy more supplies for our folks who are in these institutions. Can you talk more about that project you've been doing? Because once again, this is Amada's project. We're just supporting and blowing it up as much as we can because it's so critical. So yeah, tell us more.
Yeah, so my second hospitalization, I felt guilty. Like I didn't want to be a burden to my mom. And for a lot of folks, we're scared that we're going to be too much for our loved ones. And so I told my mom, don't worry about it. You drove 12 hours to New York, my first hospitalization. You did so much that, like, mom, you don't have to like come to my hospital. And because of that, I didn't have any personal care items. I had to use the hospital's lost and found to wear a shirt so that I can go to the cafeteria and eat food. It caused me to have a lower self-esteem because I saw other people wearing like nice clothes and like I couldn't, and I didn't want anybody to feel that way. And as a Black person, the hospital, they will give you toiletries, but the toiletries are not for Black people. So the lotion could be like really watered down, so it really doesn't do anything for your skin. Or they'll give you combs, and they're like the fine tooth combs, so like you don't like you need wide tooth. And so I wanted to, and then I also was thinking about Black men and like they still want their waves popping in the hospital. Like we still want to look good, when we in the hospital. And I wanted to give something that I didn't have, and just let them know that I care about them, that I love them, and that like I haven't forgot about them. The reason why so much of this cruelty continues is because it's behind locked doors. So if we can kind of bring these experiences out to the world and say, hey, this is happening, we need your help, we can kind of get more people involved. And then I'm also thinking about Black trans women and how, like, what personal care items can do to just affirm their gender identity so that they just feel like loved in their bodies and safe in their bodies. So this is something that it can be a small thing, but it can be so big. The mental hospital patients that I donate to, they tell me what to get. So it's not this kind of power differential. And one of them was like, I just really want chapstick. If you just give me chapstick, it's little things that you can do to give people dignity. So I've been donating once a month since January, and I'm donating to 2 places right now. I'm looking to kind of expand as well. And with your help, I can.
Absolutely. So for folks who are listening, who just come in, so what will happen is we'll go put in the link in the video. So when we post the video, you'll find those links as well as some other information. We want to encourage you to donate to support so we can make sure our folks all know that they're not forgotten, know that they will be supported, and that we can begin the process. This is a part of our stages process of tearing the lid off these institutions and saying this is not acceptable for our folks, for anybody, right? And so a part of it is how do we support our folks with the personal items that give them a little bit of dignity as we're going through distress, right? Like that's really critical. And so I just want to just thank you, right? Because that was your idea. You made that possible. And you even said you've spoken to certain folks who sent you messages before, like as well about this piece.
Yeah. So my main contact, my main hospital that I donate to is at Moses Cone Alamance in Alamance County in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I have there's a nurse there that I connect with, and of course she's a Black woman because we look out for each other. Mm-hmm. And she told me that there is a patient there that was really moved by just the underwear that I donated because he hasn't had new underwear in a really long time. It is those things that can really impact a person's lives. And now, I'm donating masks as well. What I'm hearing is that some of these patients are being discharged to homeless shelters where they can't socially distance, and they're only being given one disposable mask when they leave the hospital, which makes no sense because this is a hospital. You guys have masks. You can give more than one. And so, yeah, I'm donating reusable masks as well because some of these folks are in homeless shelters. And so I want to start, moving towards donating not only to mental hospitals, but donating to some of the homeless shelters that these patients are discharged to as well, to make sure that they're cared and they're loved there as well, because the homeless shelters are in some ways an extension of the mental hospitals in some ways. And so what I want to do is just support patients through the whole re-entry process as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely powerful. So powerful and so critical. And just once again, I just can't say thank you enough for your work and holding a light for our folks. I really want to segue because this has all been a part of this conversation. So a part of the work that this conversation is a part of is a part of Build a Black Vision for mental health, right? Build a vision for Black mental health. And so Imade and I are coming together to really convene folks who are advocates, who are therapists, who are formerly incarcerated institutions with lived experience, all folks, to really say, what is the vision for Black mental health in this country that we need to see? And it includes the things that Imade has already kind of illuminated, right? Talking about village care, right? Like talking about bringing us into the community, like integrating the community, not this kind of this ableist asylum strategy, which is really been what America has really used as the primary psychiatric tool or engagement, right? So shifting that, thinking about the way we design spaces, right? Having access to outdoors, getting rid of isolation as a strategy. As in, really transforming the world of mental health care is a big part of what Build a Black Vision is about. And so I want to invite you to make sure you check out on our Instagram, because on our Instagram we have the links to those pages. But all month long we're going to be highlighting the experiences of Black folks and people of color in general with these psychiatric institutions to once again tear that lid off. We're also going to be raising more funds and more money so that we can get more personal care items and support for our folks. And then even laying out a strategy for what is the vision? Because we know there's a different possibility. And so we'll be inviting you to join us more into the conversation about making a different vision for the world. And I think that I just think that your work has been so pivotal to making that possible, So I just want to once again, just much congratulations and gratitude for your work, for your honesty, for your heart. Just really grateful for your work.
And thank you so much for your work. Heart Space, what Beam is doing, it's helping me get through so much of the trauma around police brutality right now. You guys holding space for just my pain and my experiences. It's really helped me. Before the pandemic, I was going to support group, every week, twice a week sometimes. I was really trying to get connected, and all of that just got taken away. And so having Beam to kind of come in and lift me up through all of this, it's a lifesaver. So thank you so much to you, to your amazing colleagues at Beam. You guys are healing Black folks, and I love your work and I love your heart for this.
Well, the love is mutual. It is very mutual. I recognize that we have 9 minutes left. And so I want to, because I think that what happens, this thing cuts you off because it'll be like, true, okay. And we'll be gone. Because I've had that happen before. I'll be like mid-sentence and I'm like, yeah, girl, and racism, click. I'm like, okay, all right, it's taking me out of the game. I want to create a space. I see people are commenting maybe for questions, but also the other pieces that you want to make sure that we highlight and bring into the conversation that you feel like are really critical as we move forward.
I think a Black therapist can do a lot of great things now to build a Black vision. I think one of the things that you can do is don't call the police on your clients. I know that you want them to get help. I know that I know that you do, but I would really highly encourage, like, don't call the police like for your clients. Provide them hotlines. There's the Black Line for racial trauma for Black folks. There's the Trans Lifeline. They also don't call the police, so I love the Trans Lifeline. I'm not trans, but for trans folks, I highly recommend Trans Lifeline. I just would encourage, Black therapists, if we would build this vision of defunding the police together. Absolutely. By removing police involvement in mental health crisis situations. If you don't know like what to use or what services, ask your colleagues, ask around, create some sort of crisis plan that does not include the police. That is something that you can do today to build a Black vision. So yes.
Ashe. And any funds that you donate to Beam, there's a button that will be on the page. You can actually earmark them for Imade and Depressed While Black, because I know Depressed While Black is getting their nonprofit 501c3 popping.
We waiting for the paperwork
to come through. But in the meantime, Beam will be directing all those funds to Imade to support Imade's efforts. So if you want to continue to support the amazing work that she is doing and holding for our folks, please check it out. We will also post, once again, for folks who are watching the video, I'm going to post this video on our Instagram, and I'll also post links as well as different to articles, to books that we can continue to read, to continue engaging our advocacy. This is just one of many conversations that Imade and I will be having this month. There's a lot more to talk about. On our list of demands for the initial Build a Black Vision, the first one was defund police and psychiatric jails. It was literally what we're talking about. And so you can check that out on our Instagram. That's the first one. But the second one is fully funding Black community mental health, which means in order for us to have that village that's possible, we got to get the dollars, right? And we got to make sure, demand that people invest in our communities in ways that support our folks and maintain the dignity and humanity of all our folks. So we'll be talking more about that as well. Let me see. I see if there's any questions. I see a lot of comments here. People just saying thank you. Somebody says, what's the hotline for Black folks? Call Black Line. Check them out. Just a couple of comments. I see great conversation, and needs to be an alternative to the mandatory reporting in order for psychologists to stop calling the police. Ashe. Definitely needs to be an alternative options. And they're all alternative options, as Imade pointed out, right? So we have to uplift them, craft them, create them. And we have to be very vigilant and understand that, like, I think one piece that when we first started birthing this project, I was really clear about is that in some ways, some of the racial justice work I've seen in the world has almost completely disengaged from ableism, from this conversation, right? And we need to recognize this as a racial justice issue, as a gender justice issue, as a part of trans and queer rights, right? That needs to be a part of the conversation. And so, me and Imade gonna be here talking much shit until y'all see that, right? You know what I mean?
We're gonna do what we do.
We're gonna do what we do. But yeah, I think that's a really critical piece. So yeah, I don't have anything else to offer. I feel like we've had a really powerful conversation. I also want to encourage folks, who may witness or listen to the conversation. A lot of us with lived experience, a lot of us who are navigating various kinds of distress, to pay attention to your body and what's coming up for you. Make sure you take care of yourself. It's hard I can't imagine it's hard for any of us not to hear these stories and to know that this is happening consistently, and to have experienced it and have to retell it is itself very activating, right? And so I want to encourage us to do whatever we can to nurture, to soothe ourselves, to take care of ourselves, so that we can get back up and go and kick this place's ass, right? Like tear the walls down, right? And that is the work, right? So make sure if you can, get your rest, get your support, get your water, whatever you can. We are in solidarity with you. This is the beginning, and I just thank you so much for joining me for this conversation and for being in partnership,
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much, you all. We'll post everything for you all to look into, and we'll talk soon.
Awesome.